do a quick bookography, book report. Shawnee, but Jerry E. Clark. There's actually a pretty cool map here. It's got Lower Shawnee Town in Ohio, but there was a section on the Kentucky side. And I bet there was another section on the opposite side here. See Kentucky, you got Skippakittiki right in the middle. But then you also have Lower Shawnee Town right here. There's a section that was on the opposite side, on the Kentucky side. And then you also have a Shawnee Town on this side here. That's in Illinois, but there could have been, you know, like a Newport to the Cincinnati, Jeffersonville to the Louisville, you know, like a town on the opposite side of the river. Lower Shawnee Town, that's another settlement that was in Kentucky. Now, the reason I want to talk about this book is because Jerry E. Clark's book contradicts Clotter and Harrison's book, A New History of Kentucky. And I found lots of research, actually, even in this book, contradicts. Clotter and Harrison contradict themselves in this book. Most of the accepted histories indicate that there were no permanent Indian settlements in Kentucky during historic times. That's bullshit. There was permanent settlements. Indians didn't live in the same sense that English people did, but in the same sense that this was their land that they stayed on, they slept here, they ate here, they cooked here, they hunted here, they fucked here. You know, they fought other warring tribes, they killed game, they hunted berries, they planted corn. That's what they did their entire lives. Their entire lives was lived here. During the summertime, they had crops. During the wintertime, they migrated around with the animals. So, in permanent settlements, no, they didn't have a cabin. They didn't put a cabin made of wood, and that was their spot the whole time, except for the Skippakittiki and Lower Shawnee Town. But there were small bands of tribes, and I bet they did have like a location where this is home, this is where we always come back, this is our place that we always come home to. And I bet that place was the Skippakittiki and Lower Shawnee Town. And also read about the Cherokee and the Lower Eastern Kentucky, Lower Eastern, Southeastern Kentucky. So in Southeastern Kentucky, you got all the Cherokee that's living in the caves. And then there's Chief Redbird, and then there's Chief Butterfly, and then there's a ton of chiefs over there. There's some stories I'd like to get into with that, but the Shawnee, okay, so most of the accepted histories indicate that there are no permanent settlements in Kentucky during historic times. Yet stories abound of the presence of Indians, particularly Shawnee in many regions of Kentucky. Stories of whites held in Indian captivity, and the Indians working in swift silver mines come from the mountains of eastern Kentucky. From the central part of the state comes tales of Indian attacks on the new and fortified settlements of Harrodsburg and Boonesboro. So how can these inconsistencies be reconciled? Could it be that the Shawnee only ventured into Kentucky to intimidate the white settlers and then retreated to their settlements north of the Ohio River, as historians have noted? Certainly there are a few documented Indian villages in Kentucky during historic times. The Skippakittiki, the Shawnee settlement in Clark County, was abandoned in 1754, says this motherfucker. I don't know why they know that it was abandoned in 1754. They did know that it was burned down to the ground, right? It was burned down to the ground, and it was after John Finley had visited them. But I don't know how they know in 1754 that it was just abandoned. I don't know if that's true. I think they was murdered. They was killed out. This is the most famous of the Kentucky Indian settlements, and except for a small settlement near Limestone, Kentucky, across from the Scioto River, the only one whose exact location is known. So a small settlement near Limestone, Kentucky. So I bet that's where the Lower Shawnee Town is in Limestone, Kentucky. So Limestone, Kentucky. The question arises, then why the Shawnee would bother to raid white settlers if there's no threat to their villages? Why would the Shawnee come all the way from the Ohio state, just to come attack the Kentucky settlers? Why would they do that? Another question, equally perplexing, is why a state so rich in prehistoric village sites would have been avoided by historic Indians. Kentucky was settled relatively late in colonial times. and there would have been few pressures to drive the Indians from the area. One reason for the apparent inconsistencies may lie in the lack of understanding of the Shawnee people by the whites in the earlier period. The Shawnee were nomadic at least part of the year when they moved their small family settlements in pursuit of game. They considered the land free to be used by any Indian group who had need of it. In the summer, they settled in rather large villages where they raised crops of corn, beans, and squash. Smaller family bands moved regularly in the winter and established rather impermanent settlements as they hunted deer, bison, and other meat and hide-producing animals. Though Kentucky was a favored hunting area for the Shawnee, the lack of permanent year-round villages may have given the false impression that the region was not the Shawnee homelands. After American independence, most of the identified summer villages were located north of the Ohio River, but the Shawnee considered Kentucky as their own. In 1769, a group of Shawnee had warned Daniel Boone to leave Kentucky because it belonged to him. When Daniel Boone did not obey, it cost Daniel Boone the life of a son. So Kentucky was occupied, perhaps not in the sense of being secured by European-style settlements and towns, but frequented by a group of Indians who used it and called it their own. Lack of records of Indian settlements in Kentucky may also have been partly by the design of land speculators. Even before the Revolution, speculators had cast a covetous eye on the fertile and beautiful land in Kentucky. Several schemes launched by colonial traders, even by Benjamin Franklin, to acquire large tracts of land south of the Ohio, had gone awry. With the end of the French and Indian War, the Virginia colonial government gave large bonuses to soldiers in the form of military tracts. Surveyors were sent to Kentucky to lay out plots for various clients, including George Washington. So George Washington wanted this Kentucky land. He wanted to steal some of the Shawnee's Kentucky land. So Daniel Boone spent a great deal of his time laying out the tracts of his own for future settlement. Once, while on a mission to warn a village of a pending Indian attack, Daniel Boone delayed long enough to mark out and survey a piece of land. So instead of warning his villagers that there's an Indian attack about to come, he's still surveying land. That's Daniel Boone. So Daniel Boone cares about the land. He wants that land. To realize a profit from the sale of this land, speculators had to attract settlers who would purchase land in established communities. If potential settlers knew they would face possible threats from Indians, they might remain in the east rather than migrate west. Speculators needed buyers as well as a large number of able-bodied to develop and pacify the area. Once a man invested all he had to move to Kentucky, it was not likely that he would return. Thus, a failure to mention the presence of Indians may have been employed to gain settlers. The literature used to attract such settlers emphasized the fertile soil and rich supplies of game, but never mentioned the Shawnee. Certainly, explorers and speculators such as Daniel Boone, Thomas Bullitt, and James Harrison knew of the Indians. And the settlers soon learned of and felt the presence of the Shawnee. Favored hunting territory would not be given up easily, and the Shawnee resistance to white settlement was fierce. In fact, the Shawnee was known as one of the badasses in Kentucky, right? Between the Shawnee and the Cherokee's starting to seem badass, and I bet if I start checking out the Chickasaw, I'll like what the Chickasaw has to say too. The Shawnee were and are Algonquin speakers. They probably numbered between 2,000 and 4,000 individuals. During the early historic period in 1825, a census of Indian tribes in the United States enumerated a total of 2,293 Shawnee. By that date, wars and European diseases may have reduced the Shawnee population. The census figure, however, does not include the Shawnee who were residing in Texas at the time. The name Shawnee comes from the Algonquin term Shawan, meaning south, or Shawanagi, meaning southerner. The French called the Shawnee Chalounans. The Iroquois, with whom the Shawnee historically maintained a hostile relationship. So the Iroquois and the Shawnee did not like each other. Called them the Ontagwaha, meaning those who utter unintelligible speech. In fact, there are some 150 different names and spellings that have been used to refer to the Shawnee. Till they were moved west of the Missouri River in 1832, migration was a way of life for the Shawnee. The widespread distribution of Shawnee names for historical and contemporary towns, rivers, and other places gives evidence of the highly mobile nature of these people. This movement has perplexed historians and made it difficult to get a clear picture of the tribe. One difficulty is in trying to determine a home territory for them. However, if one looks at the earliest historic locations and at traditional claims by the Shawnee, it appears that at least a tentative case can be made for the Ohio and Cumberland valleys. This places the present state of Kentucky at the center of the Shawnee homeland. Which is true. Eskipikithiki, it's a town in Clark County, the last Shawnee town supposedly, if you don't count the lower Shawnee town. In what town? Limestone, Kentucky. In 1707, a southern Indian taken captive to Virginia drew a map on which he placed a village called Eskipik on the Appalachian River in the panhandle of Florida. This could have been a Shawnee settlement from the group identified with the Skippapikiki River in Kentucky, and possibly the group that later returned to build Eskipikithiki in Clark County. This tends to support an account of the Shawnee Blackhoof, that in his childhood he lived near the sea in Florida. Blackhoof was from Eskipikithiki, and so was Tecumseh's father. If it wasn't for Eskipikithiki, Tecumseh may never have been. Tecumseh's father come out of Kentucky. Tecumseh's father come out of Eskipikithiki. So that's big. That's big. If it wasn't for Kentucky, you wouldn't have Tecumseh. Tecumseh's a badass. Fought white people to the very end until he died. Which probably was his only fate that he could do, since he tried to do the Native American movement. Some of the Shawnee bands may not have moved farther away than what is today the eastern part of Kentucky. Kentucky historian Lucien Beckner suggests that the village of Eskipikithiki in Clark County, Kentucky, may have been originally settled by a party of those fleeing from the Cumberland River. This may have been the group situated on the Apalachicola River in 1707 who moved north, settling first at present-day Nashville and driven from there to Eskipikithiki by 1718. Eskipikithiki is a Shawnee word meaning blue lick place. The village was favorably located near present-day Winchester on a hill above Lulbygrud Creek. This site was, as the name implies, near Salt Lick, which attracted large numbers of deer. It also situated along the Great Warrior's Path, the major trail leading from villages in Ohio to the Cumberland River and on to the south. Besides Beckner's interpretation, there are many other theories about the origin of this village, but there is apparently no white contact there until 1752. Charles Hanna in the Wilderness Trail states that he believes it was not established until 1745, when he thinks Peter Chartier stopped there for 2 years after fleeing from Pennsylvania. But there's good evidence to support an earlier origin. There are some 3,500 acres of land cleared by the Shawnee in the vicinity of Indian Oldfields, as Eskipikithiki is now called. Based on his estimate on the time required to deaden and completely remove by burning the great oaks, hickories, sycamores, gums, and maples from such an area, Willard Gilson, noted Kentucky historian and naturalist, at the founding of the village at 1680. So 1680 to 1685. Such an early date is possible, in that Shawnee groups escaping the Iroquois down the Great Warrior's Path would have passed through this area. Another interpretation is that a band from Carolina broke away in 1730 and formed a village on Lulbygrud Creek. If one is to believe Blackhoof's claim that he was born at Eskipikithiki, then the interpretation of Lucien Beckner or Gilson appears to be closer to the truth. Eskipikithiki is an interesting and important village for the Shawnee. According to Beckner, it was originally built by a group belonging to the Pequot Division, and he believes this to be the village listed on the 1736 French census as containing some 200 men. It is almost certain that Eskipikithiki was the home of one of the most famous Shawnee chiefs, Katakasa, better known as Blackhoof. Several sources mention him in relation to this village, and Blackhoof himself claimed to be born there, though other sources place his birth in Florida. Blackhoof was the chief of the Chillicothe Division, as well as the recognized chief of the entire Shawnee tribe. Besides being a great orator, he was a fierce war leader and a major target in the wars between Shawnee and whites in Ohio and Kentucky until the Treaty of Greenville. Dun, 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 the end of it all in 1795. After the treaty, however, he made peace with the whites, and even Tecumseh was unsuccessful in getting Blackhoof, which is some bullshit. Blackhoof wouldn't fight with Tecumseh, but Tecumseh couldn't get him to join later hostilities against him. He died at Wapakoneta in 1831 at the supposed age of 110 years. Now, where did Eskipikithiki go? We had Eskipikithiki. It's in Clark County. The Shawnee and the French and the Indians and everybody's Spanish and English are all trading there. And then all of a sudden they just upped and left. In 1752, a Virginian trader named John Finley, a person who trades, John Finley was invited by the Shawnee to build a house at Skippakithiki, but then he was forced to flee in 1753. And then they says that it was abandoned in 1754 after the fall of Fort Necessity. What?